Most leaders destroy trust in the first 90 seconds of telling a story, and they have no idea why they're doing it. Here's what happens. A leader starts with, so back in 2019, we were working on this project. And by the time they get to their actual point, their team is already mentally checked out. The rambling isn't just boring, it's actively eroding the psychological safety they're trying to build. But there's a fix, and it takes exactly 90 seconds. I'm Lauren Reedy, and I work with mid to senior level leaders who are tired of feeling like they have to have all the answers. Leaders who know that their traditional command and control approach isn't working anymore. And here's the brutal truth. 43% of employees have lost trust in leadership due to poor communication. That's according to the research at CEO World magazine. It's not the big announcements or the quarterly reviews. It's the everyday moments when you try to connect through story and accidentally create distance. In this video, I'm going to give you a 6-step framework that transforms your leadership stories from trust killers into trust builders. And no more watching eyes glaze over, no more being the leader who talks too much and says too little. Why leadership stories actually kill trust, the rambling problem. First, let's talk about why your current approach is backfiring. Most leaders think more detail equals more credibility. This is backwards. When you start with backstory overload, like, so back in 2019 when we were working on this project, and at that time we had just restructured the team and they were building budget constraints into the project and ... I've lost you. You're charging people with a tax of your lack of clarity. And that phrase comes from the viral tweet that nails it. Rambling is a tax you charge other people for your lack of clarity. The real damage though? Rambling signals you don't value their time, and when you don't value their time, you erode psychological safety and trust. Think about it. Every time you launch into a 5-minute story that could have been 90 seconds, you're training your team to tune out when you speak. They learn when you're starting to talk, they can mentally check their email, plan their grocery list, or zone out entirely because they know eventually you get to the point, but it's going to take a while. This creates a dangerous pattern, and the more you ramble, the less they listen. The less they listen, the less they trust you and what you say. And when trust erodes, psychological safety disappears. Here's what leaders don't realize. The problem isn't that you don't have good stories. In fact, you've got great stories, but the problem is you don't know what to include. The 90-second rule that changes everything. Here's the constraint that will transform your communication. If you can't tell a story in under 90 seconds, you haven't found a story yet. Now, 90 seconds isn't arbitrary. It's the attention span's sweet spot for meaningful connection. It's just long enough to create impact and just short enough to hold attention. The constraint forces clarity. You can't ramble, you can't include a backstory, and you choose what matters. And here's what matters: the moment, the feeling, the choice, and the shift. Everything else is noise. When you strip away the noise, the story lands. The listener carries forward. The question stays with them. That's the impact. But here's what I want you to understand. Constraints create clarity, not limitation. This is not a limit. This isn't about talking less. It's about talking with clarity. Think about movie trailers. A 2-hour film gets distilled into 90 seconds, and you're hooked if it's good. You know exactly what the movie's about. You feel a little bit of emotion, and you want to see more. That's what your leadership stories should do. The difference between a story and a case study, well, stories have a heartbeat and case studies, they're just bullet points. Your team needs to feel the story, they need to understand it, and they need to have it happen fast. The feeling you're trying to convey, it happens fast or it doesn't happen at all. The impact framework, your 6-step story structure. Now let me give you the exact framework that makes all of this work. 6 sentences, 6 steps, 90 seconds. Here's how to structure any leadership story. I, inspire change. Start with why the moment mattered, not the backstory. Your opening line should be something like, at the time we were facing ... This keeps you from starting with backstory overload. You're not saying back in 2019 when I was at this company, you're saying at the time we were facing a decision that determined whether we kept our best people or lost them. See the difference? One sets the stakes, the other just buries everything. The question you're answering here is, what needed to change? Why was this moment important to me? M, moment of truth. Name the turning point. This is the heart of the story. The script cue is, then something happened. You identify the hinge in a moment, a decision, a realization, a question, maybe a conflict. This is where most leaders rush. They want to get to the lesson, the takeaway, the moral of the story. But the hinge moment is where the story lives. Don't skip it. Name it. P, personal connection. Go human. This is where leaders often rush and where the audience leans in. Your script cue is, what was going through my mind was, this step builds trust, not authority. The question you're answering is, what were you thinking and what were you worried about? What was at risk for you? This isn't an overshare moment. It's about showing that you're human. And instead of, I made the decision to restructure, try, I was worried we'd lose our best people, but I knew staying the same would lose them anyway. People follow humans, not job titles. A, authenticity over agenda. Share the real choice. This step protects the story from sounding like a case study. Your script cue is, the honest truth is, you're resisting a polished version. You're sharing what choice you made, what it cost, and what didn't go perfectly. The danger of, and then everything worked out perfectly ending, it creates distance. Perfect stories don't build trust. Real stories do. What did it cost? What choice did you make? What are you still learning? C, continuous engagement. Show what changed. This step keeps the story alive. Your script cue is, that moment didn't end there. You're showing what shifted and that you're still learning. This reinforces storytelling as practice, not performance. Leaders who tell stories that end neatly with a bow on top miss the point. The best stories don't end. They evolve. They stay with you. T, transform hearts and minds. Extend an invitation. This is where you create resonance, not instruction. The script cue is, so the question I'd leave you with is, ... You're not telling people what to do, you're asking them what they think. Instead of always be transparent, try, what would transparency look like in your situation? This aligns with inquiry-based leadership. Ask, don't answer. The shift? From leader as expert to leader as guide. If you're realizing that your leadership communication needs this kind of systemic approach, I work with leaders just like you to build these inquiry-based skills. I teach this exact framework in my keynotes and workshops. The description is in the link, laurenreedy.com/speaking, where you can learn more about bringing me in to work with your team. And while you're at it, I built a free assessment called the Leadership Curiosity Index. 6 minutes, 5 dimensions. Most leaders are surprised by what they find. Link in the description. Take it, then come back. It'll change how you hear the rest of this video. The go human moment. Why leaders skip the most important part. Here's the step most leaders rush through and where your audience actually leans into. Leaders think vulnerability is a weakness and the team thinks it's leadership. The personal connection step, the P in impact, is where trust is built or broken. What were you thinking? What were you worried about? What was at risk? This is where leaders get uncomfortable. They want to project confidence, authority, competence. They want to be the person who had it all figured out. But here's what your team actually needs. They need to know you're human. They need to know that you felt the weight of the decision, that you worried about the outcome, that you didn't have all the answers. Because when you share that, they feel permission to not have all the answers either. And that is where psychological safety lives. Think about the leaders you trust most. Chances are they're the ones who've been honest about their struggle, their doubts, and their fears. Not in a way that undermines their authority, but in a way that makes them real. Here's a practical example. Let's say you're telling a story about a time you had to let someone go. The polished version sounds like, I made the difficult decision to let Sarah go. It was the right call for the team. The human decision was like this. I was up at 3 a.m. the night before, running through the conversation in my head. I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm missing something? But I also knew that keeping her in this role where she wasn't thriving wasn't fair to her or the team. Which version makes you trust the leader more? I say the second one every single time because it's real and it's honest and it's human. And that's what builds trust. Protect the story from becoming a case study. Here's how you keep your story alive instead of turning it into a corporate presentation. The moment your story sounds polished, it stops working. Authenticity over agenda means sharing what didn't go perfectly. What did it cost? What choice did you make? And what are you still learning? The danger of the "and then everything worked out" perfect ending, well, it turns your story into a case study, and case studies don't build connection, they build distance. Here's what I mean. Let's say you're telling a story about a time you took a risk on a new initiative. The case study version would sound like this. We launched the new initiative and it exceeded all of our projections. Revenue increased by 30% and the team was energized. The real story version sounds like this. We launched the new initiative and the first 3 months were a disaster. We missed our targets, the team was frustrated, I started second guessing the entire thing, but then we made one small adjustment and started asking the team what they needed instead of telling them what to do. And that's when things shifted. See the difference? The case study version is impressive. The real story is relatable. And relatable is what builds trust. Keeping the question open. The moment didn't end there. It signals that the story is still unfolding, that you're still learning, and there's no need ending. And that's what makes it real. From instruction to invitation, the leadership shift. Finally, here's how to end your story so it actually changes behavior. Stop telling people what to do. Start asking them what they think. Transform hearts and minds isn't about giving the answer. It's about extending an invitation. So the question I leave you with is, instead of, "so here's what you should do, ... This aligns with inquiry-based leadership. Ask, don't answer. Here's a practical example. Let's say you just told a story about a time you had to make a tough call without the information. The instruction version sounds like, "so the lesson here is don't wait for the perfect invitation, make a call, and move forward." The invitation version sounds like this. So the question I leave you with is, what decisions are you waiting to make because we don't have perfect information? And what would it look like to move forward anyway? Which one creates more reflection? The second one, obviously, every time. That's the shift from leader as expert to leader as guide. You now have the impact framework, 6 steps to turning rambling into resonance. So here's what I want to do for you carrying forward. Your stories, remember, they aren't just communication tools, they're trust-building moments. Every time you speak, you're building psychological safety or eroding it. The 90-second constraint isn't about talking less, it's about mattering more. 1 sentence per step, 1 breath per step that lands well with leaders. Now that you understand how to structure a story that builds trust, you need to know how to create psychological safety that makes your team actually want to hear it. The question that stops defensive responses, the conversation frameworks that transfer ownership without micromanaging, that's what inquiry-based leadership is all about. And if you want to learn more, head to laurenreedy.com/speaking to see how we could work together.